that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom!
Washington right now, the refusal of France to support the U.S. in Iraq, triggering a symbolic protest. Instead of offering French fries, some restaurants across the country now calling them freedom fries.
All right, hello there, thrill seekers, and today I want to talk about freedom. And I have been working on a book about American Buddhism, and it occurred to me in writing this book that one of the big hang-ups or difficulties that we as Americans often have when we are trying to understand what Buddhism is about, and I say we because I definitely include myself as one of the people who has had this problem in the past and still does, is that Americans use the word freedom. America is all about freedom. Freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion, the freedom to pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, or something like that. It's all freedom. You hear freedom. I mean, when it's been the 4th of July, around here for a month. I mean, 4th of July is one day, but it goes on. The celebrations go on for about a month. And there's houses all over the place with the land of the free and the home of the brave and things like that. And just the giant word freedom I've seen on the fronts of people's houses in red, white, and blue. So we really value this idea of freedom, and freedom is a big deal for us. Land of the free and the home of the brave. Did I say that already? Anyway, it's a big deal. And so when we look at Buddhist writings and texts, we'll often see the word freedom, and unintentionally we'll tend to read into it the American definition of freedom. Let me read you something from Dogen that uses the word freedom a lot. This is from Dotoku, an essay called Dotoku in Shobogenzo. While we are endeavoring to get free, the skin, flesh, bones, and marrow are all equally intuiting and affirming freedom. Freedom! National lands, mountains, and rivers are all intuiting and affirming freedom! Freedom! Together. At this time, while we continue aiming to arrive at freedom as the ultimate treasure object, so freedom is the ultimate treasure object, this intention to arrive is itself real manifestation, and so right in the moment of getting free, there is expression of the truth which is realized without expectation. So I'm not going to try to interpret that passage, but you can see that this word freedom comes up a lot, and sometimes people will substitute the word liberation instead of freedom. I think probably because it doesn't have so many associations. This is one of the things I noticed when I was translating. When I lived in Japan and worked in Japan, one of my main jobs at Tsuburaya Productions was translating things, usually from Japanese into English, occasionally from English into Japanese. And what I noticed, and maybe some linguist out there watching this can tell me whether I'm right or what I think about this, is what I thought of as webs of association. I just made that term up. But it seems to me that even if you substitute the correct word in Japanese for the correct word in English or vice versa, the different words will have different webs of association. So they kind of knock different things in the brain and light up different things in the brain, even if you get the translation right. So often the word that's being translated as freedom is moksha. And I saved a definition of moksha for you. Let me see. Okay, here it is. The definition of moksha, this is from the internet, is the freedom from the eternal cycle of life, death, and rebirth. This is the ultimate goal of an individual who practices Hinduism. So, and it's also often an ultimate goal for somebody who practices Buddhism and Jainism, for that matter. Moksha is derived from the Sanskrit word muk, which means to free. In Indian culture, the term moksha literally means freedom from samsara. So, in American culture, freedom usually means individual liberty. So I have the freedom to do what I want. Whereas in Buddhist culture, the word freedom is freedom from the constraints of individuality itself. The concept is that the individual is not a real thing. The individuality is kind of an illusion we create in our minds of ourselves as an individual. However, there is some wiggle room here, or some overlap between the freedom espoused by Buddhists and the freedom espoused by Americans. And this was kind of brought home to me when I first started studying with Nishijima Roshi. So this would be the early 1990s, or about the middle of the 1990s, early middle 1990s. And the place where Nishijima Roshi gave his lectures on Saturdays was in a room on the campus of Tokyo University. And the route that Nishijima Roshi took from where he lived to the place where he gave the lectures would bring him through Harajuku. Now, some of you, if you're familiar with Japan at all, probably may know where this is going, or approximately where this is going. Because Harajuku is quite famous as this district in Tokyo where it's really trendy for young people to go and express themselves. So every time I would go through Harajuku on a Saturday, or especially on a Sunday, I'd see these kids, usually teenagers or kids up into their, mid to late 20s, dressed in the most outlandish clothes they could find, like crazy clothes, crazy makeup. A lot of them listening or playing music that was like kind of out there and wild. And one of the days that Nishijima Roshi came in for his lecture in Tokyo University, he said, I was walking through Harajuku on my way over here, and I saw all these kids dressed in outlandish clothes and outlandish makeup and things. And I had not been sitting with Nishijima Roshi for long by then, so I didn't know him very well, but I could see standing in front of me this elderly Japanese man with a shaved head and Buddhist robes on. And so I was thinking, okay, here comes, rolling my eyes, thinking, here comes this lecture about the downfall of Japanese society and how horrible it is that these kids look so crazy and blah, blah, blah. This is what I expected. But he took a completely different turn with it. He said, I think this is a wonderful thing because I think this shows that Japanese young people are coming into themselves, are learning to be themselves. And that he regarded as an important step. So this idea of transcending the individual doesn't mean accepting a kind of conformity to the wider society, which would be obvious, I think, to anybody who's spent any time reading about the great Zen masters of the past, which I think a lot of people don't do, because a lot of the assumptions I'm seeing coming from people who are supposedly representing Zen these days seem like they've never heard of this. But a lot of the great Zen masters of the past were total eccentrics and were people who rejected the wider society completely. That's one of the things that attracted me to Zen in the first place. And I think it's one of the things that attracted the early beatniks and people who got into Zen in the 60s was this kind of iconoclastic image of the Zen master. Because to pursue Zen, let's talk about Zen instead of Buddhism as a whole, because I know Zen better. Zen is one form of Buddhism, for those of you. I make this statement all the time, but a lot of people think Buddhism is just one thing, but Zen is a specific form of Buddhism. So the Zen training is to go into it is to reject straight society. And it's called shukkei. And shukkei means literally leaving home. And it doesn't just mean leaving your home to go live in a monastery. It means leaving behind the sort of comforts of the wider society to go and do something else. And kind of ironically, what this means, at least for novices in Zen, is accepting a very rigid set of rules. So everybody at the monastery shaves their head. Men and women both shave their heads. They all wear the same clothes. They all eat at the same time. They eat the same stuff. They wake up at the same time in the morning. They go to sleep at the same time in the evening. They work together. Everything is very rigid and compartmentalized, and there's these very strict rules of conduct and what you do. And a lot of people complain when they see this that Zen is militaristic. But there's a difference, because the military conformity and wearing the same clothes and eating the same food and shaving your head and all that is intended for the purpose of being able to make a group of people work as a unit without having to think for themselves. They just follow the orders of their commander and they go and do the thing, that they're told to do. That's the meaning, or that's the purpose behind military uniformity. The same sort of uniformity, it is rather similar in a lot of ways, in a Zen temple is not meant to make everybody working for this kind of common goal or anything. I mean, there are working for the common goal of liberation, but they're not trying to do a thing. What they're trying to do is to transcend their need to be individuals and find a more universal self that way. A universal self that even transcends the monastery. So the universal, the self, the collective self, the military unit is trying to discover is the military units, or maybe the nation that they're defending, that collective unit. It's a limited collective unit. The collective unit that the Buddhists are going for is this universal collective unit that includes everybody and everything. So it's much bigger than that. And one of the best ways to do that is to put away your demands for individuality. This is something, I'll go on a slight rant here, this is something I think it's getting lost in American Buddhism. Because, Americans are very insistent on being individuals and being themselves. And what's happening these days in a lot of American Zen is going, yeah, you got it, you can do that. I think this is happening in the American military too, to a certain extent, where they want you to be yourself and everything. And then this idea of transcending the self just gets lost, because everybody's expressing themselves all over the place. And they're lacking that other something. But I think the uniformity of Zen is very good at that, because it is a transcendence. It allows the transcendence of the individual self. But as with that example I told you about Nishijima Roshi, it's not a denial of the individual self. It's just putting the individual self in its proper place in the scheme of things. And one of my favorite examples of this, which I've used many times on this channel and in books and things, is a simile of a puzzle piece. So if you think of a jigsaw puzzle, each piece of the jigsaw puzzle has to be a certain size, a certain shape, a certain set of colors. It has to be its own individual thing. But the reason is that it is its individual own thing is because that's how it completes the puzzle. So if an individual puzzle piece were to try to do what a lot of Americans do and be the biggest, most colorful, loudest, sharpest, pointiest puzzle piece it could be, it wouldn't complete the puzzle anymore. It would ruin the puzzle. If, on the other hand, you tried to be a total conformist and tried to be the roundest, beigest, most inconspicuous puzzle piece you could possibly be, you would again ruin the puzzle. You wouldn't fit anymore into the puzzle. So part of what we're doing is understanding ourselves as individuals, but also being realistic about our illusions about that. So this is a tricky thing, and it's been a tricky thing for me for the whole time that I've been studying Buddhism. I was voted most individualistic in my high school senior class in some kind of poll that we did. And actually, it was a little bit of a cheat, because I was part of the committee that came up with this poll, and I was the one who suggested most individualistic as a category, because I thought I would win it, and I did. Being an individual, being individualistic was always really important to me. And it kind of ground my gears to do the Buddhist thing where you're not allowed to be an individual. But understanding that the individuality is just part of the larger puzzle kind of helped me solve that particular problem. That the individuality didn't have to be denied or smashed down or crushed. It was just trying to find the way that it fit into the bigger picture. That's what's important. Another Sanskrit word that is often translated as freedom or liberty or liberation is vimukti. which in Chinese/Japanese, in the Japanese pronunciation of Chinese, is gedatsu. And this is defined by Nishijima Roshi in one of his comments, or the footnotes, sorry, thinking internet. Anyway, in one of the footnotes, as salvation, emancipation, a disjunction, giving up, release, deliverance, liberation, release from bonds of existence, final emancipation. And on the internet, I found a couple of other definitions of it. What is the meaning of vimukta? If you are exempt from a role or duty, you do not have to obey it or perform it. So that's where it comes from. So it comes from that being exempt from the rules, which could be the rules of society or could be the rules that you set for yourself as an individual or the limits that you set for yourself as an individual. And here's another one, vimutti, which is Pali. Freedom from suffering. The goal of the Buddhist path, canonical Buddhism distinguishes two kinds, freedom through understanding and freedom of mind. So your freedom of mind and freedom from the mind, freedom from the constraints of the mind. And one of the problems when studying this is often it is implied or it is understood that everybody knows what this means. So when I was looking through, did I say this? I've done 3 takes of this video and I've forgotten what I've said in different takes. But I went through Dogen's Shobo Genzo looking for instances of the words freedom and liberation. And the thing I noticed is that when Dogen says freedom or liberation, he just kind of leaves it hanging. He doesn't really explain what he means, except in a couple of places, so I'd like to read those to you. Here's one. This comes from Shukkei Kudoku, which is praise for leaving home and family, which I talked about. The Buddha said, furthermore, Shariputra is one of his disciples, if a bodhisattva mahasattva, that's basically a person who wants to study Buddhism, in this case, in this sense, want on the very day of leaving family life, that's Shukkei, to realize Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi, that's complete enlightenment, and want on that very day to turn the Dharma wheel so that they turn for countless beings and blah, 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 blah. What they're looking to do is to attain liberation from the mind of excess. So that's what we're talking about, the liberation from the mind that wants something else other than what is here and now. And here's another one, maybe not quite as clear of a definition, Hachidainin Gaku, which is the 8 qualities of a great person or something like that. The Buddha said, if you bhikshus, that's monks, have wisdom, then you will be without greed and attachment. By constantly reflecting on and observing yourself, you will prevent wisdom from being lost. This is just to be able, within my Dharma, to attain liberation. So liberation is being without greed and attachment. So being liberated from greed and attachment, liberated from wanting things to be other than they are, which contrasts with the American idea of liberty, which is often the liberty to change the way things are and make things greater. But then again, we do value that, at least socially, and I suppose Buddhists also value that. But we're not stopping at that. So that's kind of where I see the difference between American ideas of freedom and liberty and a Buddhist idea of freedom of liberty, is that the American idea of freedom of liberty sort of stops at the individual. So we're liberated up to the point of being the individual. We assume that's the end of everything. We assume that the ultimate state, the ultimate thing we are, is individual. So that's the, and then that's what we're going to go and express. Whereas Buddhism doesn't assume that the ultimate state of a being, of a person, is their individuality. It assumes that there's an ultimate beyond individuality, which we can approach by, ironically, kind of giving up our individuality and going into a monastery where you're forced to do the same thing as everybody else, which when I experienced it myself, was very liberating, because you knew exactly where you were supposed to be and what you were going to eat and what you were going to do all day for the time that you were in the monastery. And by having that, it liberates you from having to, satisfy your own wants and needs. You have trust in the monastic system that your wants and needs, well, at least your needs, are going to be satisfied by the system. And then you can concentrate on something that's beyond your own individual self. So there you go. That was my explanation, for what it's worth, of the difference between freedom in the American sense and freedom in the Buddhist sense. If you want to help me be free to buy food for Ziggy, you can go and send me a donation, and the links are below. If you're watching this on YouTube, it's in the description section of the YouTube video. Or if you don't like that, you can go to the URL that you're seeing on the screen right now, which is hardcorezen.info/donate. That is hardcorezen.info/donate, somewhere around there. Those are where you will find my PayPal and Patreon links, and those are my main ways of making a living. And I appreciate your support, but you don't have to support me if you don't want to support me. And I will be going to Europe soon. This is a list of the places I will be, and if you want direct links to how to join to those events and see me, you can go to hardcorezen.info/events. We will see you next time. Have a good time all the time. Bye. Hey Ziggy. Ziggy. Hey Ziggy. Do you have liberation? Do you have liberty? We give you a little bit of liberty, but then we put you on a leash too, don't we? Well, I don't know. You seem to like the leash, though. I don't know. Anyway, I hope you feel free, sort of. All right. Bye, Ziggy. He's looking for a fly. There's a fly flying around the room. He wants to get it.